Greetings and welcome. If you haven't heard of Spotify for podcasters, it's the easiest way to create and publish your podcast. It's free. That's right, it's free to download. It has built-in tools that will allow you to record and edit your podcast from your cell phone or any smart device. Spotify for podcasters also distributes your podcast on virtually any platform that streams podcasts, like Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Apple and Google Podcasts, and much more. You can even monetize your podcast with no minimum listeners. Spotify for Podcasters is your one-stop app for podcasting. Remember, it's free.
Welcome to the Trigger Warning Talk podcast, where we have uncensored conversations, we exchange information, and we provide a ton of resources for the listeners. We are streaming on all major platforms, so wherever you get your favorite podcasts, we are on there. You can also, as a plus, as a bonus, you can watch these interviews, the ones that we record on video via StreamYard. You can watch them on the free version of Spotify, so you don't have to pay for it. Or you can go to our YouTube channel, which is the company name Penton Pending Consulting Solutions, LLC. We are sponsored by Spotify for Podcasters. So we're sponsored by Spotify for Podcasters. And, of course, we're produced by Penton Pending Consulting Solutions, LLC. If you are triggered at any point during this podcast, and I mean any point, and you need help right here, right now, right today, call 911. If you are listening, because we have a worldwide audience, if you're listening from the UK or Switzerland or Australia, you can call your local 999, like in the UK. I know in Switzerland it's 112 or 143. If you don't have an immediate need, but you still need help, no problem. We provide all kinds of websites and phone numbers for domestic violence, trafficking, sexually based offenses. So we refer you to a company called RAIN, which is Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network. If you don't have any of those concerns, but you have other issues like alcoholism, like drug abuse, or you're a supporter, we provide that information. So if you're a supporter, Al-Anon. If you have alcohol issues, AA. And if you have drug issues, we provide the number and website to Narcotics Anonymous. And finally, if you're suicidal, know somebody that's suicidal, or see a suicidal issue, toll free 24/7 here in the States, call 988. I got a very special guest in the house, Dr. MAIYSHA Clairborne. She's an MD. She's a medical doctor, being a first responder, being a paramedic, and a firefighter. Dr. MAIYSHA, I said I'm going to change my title from firemed to physician surrogate firefighter, because I tell people the technical term for a paramedic is physician surrogate. Oh. I'm not a man. Yeah. And so I've been using that more and more, and people are like, oh, really? Oh, and so see even your reaction. That's what I'm saying. So getting that from a medical doctor, that got goosebumps right now. Look, we have fun, even though we discuss traumas, and we talk about traumas. Like I said, we discuss true crime. So under the true crime banner that you see behind me on my logo, we talk about missing persons, specifically at the end of every episode. 99% of these missing person cases are melanated men, women, and children. It could be an abduction, a runaway, or a kidnapping. The reason that is the case is I wanted to bring more media attention to the plight of those individuals that we don't see in mainstream media. And we cover human and sex trafficking, domestic violence, and also sexually based offenses. Dr. Clairborne, you have such a long CV. I'm not going to read it all, but I'll provide the links, and I'm sharing. That's why y'all got to watch these interviews, because you miss it if you just listen to Dr. MAIYSHA. Again, she's a medical doctor. She's a master coach. She's a hypnotherapist. She's an NLP, which is Neuro Linguistic Programming trainer. She's a TEDx speaker. She's a rapid transformation specialist. She's a mom. She's just an educated Black woman. Y'all know I love educated Black women. Shout out to Mrs. LP as well as Mama LP. I just love educated Black. I do. And I highlight them all the time on this podcast. Partially because of my background, and partially because I just get a different sense of how trauma is dealt with and how it's approached and how we come to different resolutions. At the end of the day, we're all human. If I needed a kidney and Dr. MAIYSHA was not only a willing donor, she was a match, because you got to be both, I'm going to make it. It's not going to matter that it came from a woman. It came from a living, breathing donor who was willing to give me one of her kidneys, who's a human being. So we got to get past this us against them type of stuff or whatever. At the end of the day, I want to do my part to help us get back to our humanity. And I believe you and your academic and your personal work have that same type of focus. Today, we are going to be talking about primary, secondary, and vicarious traumas. This is part one, folks, because I told y'all this year we was doing different shit. And Dr. MAIYSHA, we use real language on this podcast, so you don't have to censor yourself. I'm just saying.
Okay, good to know.
So we do real shit. Fluff is an action word. That's what you do to pillows and shit or whatever. You know, that's what you add to cappuccinos, as I always say. We are doing a bunch of series. Most of them are 3-parters. Some of them are going to be extended. Dr. MAIYSHA and I, we might do an extended thing because we got other stuff that we got in the works as far as tackling some of these traumas. So primary, secondary, and vicarious traumas. Part one is going to be focused on you and your story. Part two, we're going to talk about everything that you need to know and want to know and should know about primary, secondary, and vicarious traumas. And the third segment will be focused on resolutions, on plans of actions. We don't do dialogue only here, Dr. MAIYSHA. That's trauma dumping. You know what I always say. You want to just talk and you don't want to talk about no plans of action, leave me out of it. I can sit on the couch binge watching Paternity Court and picking the lint out of my belly button. I'd rather do that than have these trauma dumping dialogue only conversations.
That's
that
right.
being said, I'm going to pass you the mic because I love on your website, on your Mind Mapping Academy, I got a little ADD. So when I saw that, I was like, see, Dr. MAIYSHA, that's my homie right there. Helping people transform their lives by teaching them the tools to break old patterns, create new ways of thinking and being that leave them empowered, fulfilled, equipped to create a new legacy for the next generation. And then you say, learn conscious communication, rapid change processes, and transformational coach. The mic is yours, Queen. You can start wherever you want to start. You can be as general or specific about how you became you in this primary, secondary, and vicarious trauma. I'm just going to sit back and push the buttons.
You're so funny. Well, first of all, you know, I'm going to call you LP because that's how I know you. You know, I just appreciate, first of all, I appreciate what you're doing with this podcast. I think it's necessary. It's not an easy thing, and it is a necessary thing. And I just appreciate your commitment to bringing light to these stories and to educating the public. So I just want to start with that. It's just, you know, appreciated. And for someone who, you know, teaches a lot about trauma, someone who's trauma informed, someone who is in that space trying to help people work through their traumas and teach people how to help people how to work through their traumas. So that's very much appreciated. And thank you also for allowing me to be on here and to share my voice and share, you know, my story as well as what I know, my expertise on to your, you know, to your community. I definitely appreciate that as well. So I just wanted to start there. I always like to give flowers and gratitude, because I do stand in gratitude. It's the only way I can stay in the work, right? Because this is not always the easiest work to be in. So about me, gosh, where should I start? I think I'll start with what I do, and then I'll kind of backtrack. I'll go backwards. I might jump around a little bit because that's just the way it is. You know, a good movie does like you know, callbacks and what do you call those, flashbacks and all of the backs. So what I do now, I am a physician by training. I no longer practice clinical medicine. I actually left clinical medicine to do what I do now, which is teach people neuro-linguistic programming and the tools and techniques of trauma-informed communication. How I got here, though, was basically through recognizing my own traumas and recognizing and really coming to a point where I was just like, you know, I cannot keep the knowledge that I have to myself when so much trauma is out there. So I actually left clinical medicine 6 years ago, or I decided to leave clinical medicine 6 years ago, sold my practice, but I actually started teaching this in 2020. And 2020 is, that was a pivotal year, right? Where we have the sort of the tridemic. We had the COVID-19, we had the isolation, and we had all of the violence, and racial tension, police violence, all of that kind of compounded on each other. This is when, equity, diversity, inclusion started to resurface, because it was surfaced and then it was buried when people got too comfortable, and then started to resurface. And I think for me, when I saw Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd in that rapid succession, it was the switch for me. The light switch flipped, and I was like, there's no way that I cannot be in this and contributing in some kind of way. Now, prior to that, I had been coaching people who were burned out in medicine. It flipped a switch for me. And for me, it was like what I was doing was not enough. I'm a single mom. I couldn't be out in the streets marching. I was out of clinical medicine. I really wasn't on the front lines of medicine anymore. So I just thought to myself, like, what could I do? How could I contribute from my particular expertise? And knowing that, I know the world of trauma, and also just in terms of this, knowing that I know communication in the way I know it, I felt like bringing that expertise into the world of the equity, the inclusion, the anti-racism and anti-oppression space was the first way to go. Now that's sort of like the present, but prior to that, when I first left clinical medicine, I actually was coaching burned out medical professionals, particularly moms in medicine. And there's a lot of, sort of trauma that I experienced that I helped them through, because not what a lot of people don't know. I think that the physician life is very much glamorized. And I think even throughout the pandemic, a lot of people, for a moment, I think they were like, oh, the doctors are heroes. But I think for a lot of it, like healthcare workers and particularly physicians are still thought to have it easier. And what a lot of people don't recognize is that there's a lot of trauma, not only in the field, like being a doctor, especially if you're a person of color or a woman, right, or any other marginalized identity, right? If you're, non-binary, if you're, anything that is not hetero cis white, so anyway, there's a lot of trauma inside of our industry that people don't see for physicians. And it really even is a continuation of our training. Our training can be very malignant and very traumatic, very abusive. Now, I was fortunate enough to not come up in a training that was abusive, but the trauma part was there. Now, I'm going to put a pin in that and take it back further, because what I'm sharing is sort of like this exposure to trauma. And what I'll share with you is I discovered that I was a trauma survivor, but I didn't discover that until I was in my 30s, mid 30s. Oh, wow. Right. Because I wasn't, my education around trauma didn't come until later in my career. I am a child survivor, witness survivor of domestic violence, domestic abuse. I grew up for over a decade watching my mom be abused, and by her second husband, my stepfather. When I was sitting at the table with a therapist, but she was my friend. We were in a, where she was a girlfriend and she happened to be a therapist. And I was sharing with her some things that I was feeling. And she asked me, "Are you a trauma survivor?" And I was like, "No, my mom is." So this is where we start to get into the subject of primary, secondary, right?
Yes.
I was like, "No, I'm not a trauma survivor. My mom is a trauma survivor. I mean, I grew up in a home watching my mom be abused." And she looks dead in my face and says, "Yes, you are a trauma survivor." And that in and of itself, it took me back. Like I was like,
Okay.
what? I didn't understand that. I didn't understand that I could live in a house and watch someone else be physically abused, but somehow I was a victim of trauma. But then when I look back on what I saw, like as I really, sometimes it takes people really sharing with you in a particular way. You hearing it back from another person's mouth to really get it. I
Okay.
think about some of the things that I saw growing up. Like you walk into the house and you tiptoe and you don't know who you're going to get. If you're going to get nice stepfather or you're going to get, not so nice. If you're going to go to sleep with hearing glass breaking and things being thrown around the house and screaming and yelling, when you go to sleep, not knowing if you're going to wake up the next morning without a parent, like these are the kinds of things I did. And it didn't hit me until like that was sort of the mirror was held up. Like, oh yeah, I was depressed as a sixth grader. I did feel suicidal as a sixth grader, right?
What year is this time period? What's the
This
time?
was oh my, you gonna make me do math now? I was okay. Let me give you context. I was born in 1975. I was around 12 years old, so it's somewhere around the 80s.
But I ain't ask you no more questions until we wrap up. That's all I'm saying.
now he's making me do math. Trauma response. But oh, but yeah. So, but it's interesting because I actually, like now, I when I think about children who are completing suicide at such a young age, it baffles me. Like, oh my gosh, these kids are so young. But sometimes I forget how old I was when I first felt that way.
Okay.
Right? How I think in sixth grade you're supposed to be 12. Like how in sixth grade, I didn't know any better. Had I known better, I might not actually be here. And this is, like things I haven't shared a lot about, right? Not a lot of people know this. But, I took a bottle of Tylenol. It wasn't a whole bottle. It was like half a bottle, and mixed it up with some Advil and things of that nature. But the intent, right?
Yeah.
And so I forget like, man, I was there, and that was traumatic. And I was the oldest of three. And it was interesting to kind of get, to look now at my sisters, and each of us had different experiences because I was 5.5 years older than my middle sister, and I'm 9 years older than my youngest sister. And my mom, fortunately, left when I was in the 7th grade, and she was with him for many years before that. So having like gone through that and realized how long I had been stuffing things down and like compartmentalizing and like how dissociated from my feelings I had become, and how just, and then then I got to college. So, my mom left, and, honestly, hurt people sometimes. So there was a little bit of that in my household that strained our relationship a little bit. And then, I made it through to high school and did very well, was very high performing. And this is the other thing, like you're not always nobody would have ever known I felt the way I felt. I went to school. I had put on a happy face. I made straight A's. I was pretty popular. And then I went home and then I was sad and I felt lonely, and I felt misunderstood. And nobody would have ever known that. I didn't realize how much that impacted me until that moment when my friend told me, yeah, you're a trauma survivor. I think that this work for me everything that I have gone through has prepared me to be in this work, to be able to be authentic in this work, to be able to be compassionate in this work. And to be honest, when I first started really diving deep and learning about trauma, personality profile tendencies, my introvert, extrovert, all of those. So I was, when I got into medical school, we had to take this test called the Myers-Briggs Personality Inventory, and I was pulled up into the school psychologist's office, and I was told, you need to be careful this next 4 years because based on your profile, you have a tendency to isolate. And in this environment, that can be dangerous and can lead to depression. And I remember that day just completely breaking down in her office. I didn't even realize. She said depression, and it wasn't like I was conscious that I was feeling depressed. I do remember just like breaking down in her office, and then she asked me, like, do you want to, engage in an ongoing therapeutic relationship? And for the next 4 years I did. So there's been a lot of unpacking. And even so, when I started learning about like trauma, to teach trauma, all the stuff, so I've just been, it's been a journey. It's to teach about this work requires that you do the work, and you don't realize how much you've endured, and what like for me, I didn't realize how much I had endured and what I had been pushing away or compartmentalizing or really just blocking out, and until I started doing this work.
This is the Trigger Warning Talk podcast. We are sponsored by Spotify for podcasters. We are produced by Penton Pending Consulting Solutions, LLC. We're on all major platforms. You can watch these interviews on Spotify, the free version, as well as our YouTube channel. All that information will be listed in the show notes. We're talking with Dr. MAIYSHA Clairborne. She's a medical doctor. She is a communication consultant, a coach, an NLP trainer, and she does TED Talks. We're talking about, in this part 1 series, primary, secondary, and vicarious traumas. For you, Dr. MAIYSHA, witnessing domestic violence, or DV for short. Mm-hmm. What's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think about what you saw as a kid compared to what you first saw as an MD in the domestic violence situation? How do you compare those two?
How do I compare those two? I think as a child, you don't understand what's going on. And it's just very scary, right? It's just, you're just trying to survive as a child, right? Yes. You're just trying to make it through day to day. You're trying not to rock the boat. That's where people pleasers are born, where people walk on eggshells. Like I remember, like those were sort of those are some of the, I'm gonna say, skills that I developed, because they really truly are skills. However, at the time, I remember walking on eggshells, and that did not end when my mom left. By the way, looking at it from a child's eyes, it's just survival. Now, what I'll say is when I first started really interacting with patients in residency, and this came up, it really brought up a lot of anger for me. And it was because, just like there was, it put a fire in me. And I developed, and actually, it's interesting because in residency, it was, I was really committed to, I was just trying to figure out, like, and committed to, how do I as a physician help to prevent any woman from staying or being harmed any further than they have been? You know, how can I as a doctor be a conduit to their safety? And
Yes.
so, you know, one of the things that I did in residency was I was the head of creating the domestic violence safety plan inside of our clinic for so like for, it was the questionnaire and the actual safety plan, what to do if. And so, and that, you know, it gave me a feeling as though, okay, at least I am, it's almost like, I'm losing the word that I want to use, but I couldn't help my mom, but I could help these women, right? So then coming back to this space of when I was a child, helplessness, like I can't help, I can't protect, I can't, you know, I just am surviving. And in my first experiences, you know, in residency, it was, well, I can create a domestic violence action plan for the clinic so that all the doctors there would have an algorithm, a questionnaire and an algorithm when they suspected. And it also, you know, there's a questionnaire. There was a questionnaire at that time, and specifically how you did the questionnaire and how you, if the partner was there, how you interacted with the partner. Like all of that algorithm was right in the electronic medical records. So they just had to follow the algorithm. So that's one of the things that I created. And that gave me I think, a feeling of agency, a feeling of I am contributing, like a feeling of I'm doing something about it to prevent.
Absolutely. We're mandated reporters. I talk about this stuff all the time, Dr. MAIYSHA. I say, you know, as a mandated reporter, you don't get time off.
Mm-hmm.
You're on the clock 24/7 as a mandated reporter. If I am out at the mall or I'm somewhere, you know, off duty, not at work, I'm retired now, but it doesn't matter. If I'm somewhere and I see something, I gotta report that stuff. I can't be like, oh, I gotta wait till I clock in. It doesn't work like that for us.
Right.
And I want more people that are not clinicians, that are not practitioners, just everyday, whatever gender you identify as.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about see something, say something. It's the same concept. You don't have to be a mandated reporter. You don't have to be licensed like us. You don't have to be certified like us. You don't have to be a practitioner or a clinician like us. You see something, you say something, because they're going to come out and they're going to do an investigation. And if it's nothing, okay. If it's maybe something but not major, they can recommend therapy. They can recommend different forms of counseling.
Right.
And if it's something major, well, damn it, maybe you saved that kid's life.
That's right.
Maybe you saved that kid's quality of life.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe both. Maybe the parent too, because most people that abuse were abused.
Mm-hmm.
As you said, hurt people. You know, you don't typically wake up and say, today's a great day to kick somebody's ass. Today's a great day to, you know, shoot this heroin, as they call it in St. Louis, in my neck of the woods. Mm-hmm. You know, today's the day that, you know, I'm going to go commit this violent, critical incident at this shopping mall, at this house of worship, at this school, at this nightclub. Mm-hmm. I get these breaking news stories every single day when it comes to these traumas, because of the work I do as an active shooter consultant and stop the bleed, CPR trainer, and all this stuff. You know, so I know for me, when I would go on the ambulance, I thought about my license, and I thought about my certifications, and I thought about me being a mandated reporter. I worked in the state of Missouri. The responsibility hit me like a ton of bricks. The very first time I was running the show, I was the lead EMT, the lead medic, what have you. Because I'm responsible for everything and everybody on that scene. The patient, the bystanders, the other first responders, all of that stuff. And that's just from the pre-hospital setting. Yeah. As a practitioner, as a physician surrogate, I have to be the eye in the hurricane of your emergency. And whatever that emergency is, it meant more to me when I know I had a higher level of responsibility for children and elders.
Yeah.
Because as a mandated reporter, you know, if you're on that family care safety registry,
Mm-hmm.
you know that can be the difference between you working or not working.
Right.
So when you're talking about how it was viewing it from a minor to someone who now is a medical doctor, that's why I asked the question, because I think a lot of times, and you alluded to it earlier when you talked about this mystique that doctors have.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one thing I tell people all the time, Dr. Marja, we practice medicine. It is not an exact science, folks.
Yes.
It is not. I don't care if you went to Johns Hopkins or wherever you got your degree or your EMT license or certification or medic. We are practicing medicine.
Right.
It is science, but it's not an exact science. This is flesh and blood. We are living, breathing human beings. We make mistakes. We forget shit. Sometimes we go overboard on stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We are just as much of a human being as the next person. We're not one cell amoebas or cyborgs or anything like that. However, we have a greater responsibility to, damn it, be better and do better.
Yeah.
And fight harder for those that need the advocacy and the awareness to help them overcome these traumas. Primary, whether you're directly being victimized, secondary, you witness it. Because I always say, Dr. Marja, when it comes to trauma, anybody can get it and anybody can get it.
Yeah.
And the vicarious part, I want you to talk about that from your point of view.
Absolutely.
How does trauma, because we define the first two, how does vicarious trauma look to you from your academic, medical, professional point of view?
Yeah. And before I do that, I want to kind of nuance even secondary trauma, right? Because that primary, so you have really two big categories, right? Direct and indirect. And primary is the direct. And secondary and vicarious are the indirect, right? And so that secondary and that vicarious is really kind of nuanced, because the secondary really are the caretakers of the people who actually experienced the trauma, the very close connected and caretakers. So like first responders experience secondary trauma. Children of, like, from my point of view, my vantage point as a child who was in the household, was a very close contact with my mom, secondary trauma. The nuance for vicarious trauma is bystander trauma. It's witnessed, and it can be witnessed from anywhere. It could be witnessed on television. It could be witnessed by hearing about it. It can be, and even vicarious trauma can be passed down. Right? You have
generational trauma.
Generational trauma.
I'm doing a series on that now.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's sort of like the nuanced distinction between secondary, because the secondary people are very, very close to the primary direct impacted people, and the vicarious are bystanders, are not as close, but they're still experiencing it. And the thing I think is so important for people to really get is that it doesn't matter if it's primary, secondary, or vicarious trauma. Trauma lands in the body as trauma. Now, of course, the person who experiences the direct trauma is probably going to have the most heightened experience, right? And yet, if a person who is a bystander has experienced similar trauma for themselves, which we call re-traumatization, it could be exactly like it was the person. It could land in their body like it was, they were there.
Okay, well, there. Yeah.
So it's important to understand, we can't say, well, this person is more traumatized than this, or this is not traumatizing for this person, because we don't know. We don't know what another person has experienced, where witnessing a trauma could activate something that they've experienced in the past, like put them right back in that time period, in that circumstance. Yeah.
We're going to put a pin in it because we're right at the 40-minute mark. And I told you, I'm getting you out of here in less than an hour. I got one question for you, and we're going to pick this up in part 2 because I'm telling you, I got goosebumps right now. Like, seriously. Like, I got one question with 27 parts. I'm going to say that for part 2. Dr. MAIYSHA, don't laugh because we're going to be on. We're going to go past this hour. I'm trying to get you out of here.
Okay.
If you could write a letter or an email to your younger self, to pre-Dr. MAIYSHA, what would you say?
If I could write a letter to my younger self, I think what I would say, this is a good question, is that I know it feels like you're alone right now, and you're really not alone. To keep putting one foot in front of the other, to find your safe spaces. They do exist. And that everything that you're experiencing right now will actually end up being the conduit to help many others.
I ain't got nothing else to add to that, but thank you, Dr. MAIYSHA, for joining us on the Trigger Warning Talk podcast. Man, you got me turning up here, Dr. MAIYSHA. Look, but that's okay because men got to stop this emotional suppression that we're taught as boys.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, we're going to talk about that, especially in part 2. We're definitely going to talk about it.
Yes.
Because I deal with that a lot. Not only as a man, but also I moderate a number of rooms on Clubhouse, a number of men's rooms also, and we talk about these things all the time. We talk about journaling. We talk about, expressing your feelings without shame and guilt and all these different things. For you, I want to give you your flowers right here, right now. I can't wait for us to do part 2. And again, you continue to be the blessing that you are. I look forward to us linking up. We're going to talk probably either later today or tomorrow. But I'm going to go ahead and let you go because I'm going to be a man of my word. And we're at the top of the hour now. So Dr. MAIYSHA Clairborne, MD, thank you so much for joining us on the Trigger Warning Talk podcast. You have a great day, and I will talk to you, and I'll see you in these Clubhouse streets.
Yes, you will see me. And thank you again. Thank you again. I can't wait for part 2.
That's all right, Rob. We're going to connect, and we'll come up with a schedule for that.
Absolutely. All right. Take care.
Right. Take
Thank
care.
You.
That's Dr. MAIYSHA Clairborne, folks. So we're going to move into the last part where we talk about a missing person case. And I want to show everybody that's watching this podcast Dr. Clairborne's information. So I have her link tree. Well, it's not Linktree. It's Linktree. It's mindmappingacademy.com. That's her website, which is part of Linktree, and also her IG page, which is at Dr. MAIYSHA. No spaces, no periods. So I will have the links for both of these, her website and her IG page, in the show notes for part 1 of the primary, secondary, and vicarious trauma with Dr. MAIYSHA Clairborne, MD. The missing person case. We are going to pull up our favorite Charlie Project. Again, we cover missing person cases that are 99% melanated folks. This young lady, Sarah Nicole Graham, is Native American. She's been missing since February 4th of 2015 from Fairmount, North Carolina. Now, y'all know I'm in North Carolina now, so this hits close to home. She's a female, classified as endangered missing. Again, she's Native American. She was born April 1st, 1996, so she's 27 years old now. Age 18, she was 5'4" at 160 pounds as of the date that she's been missing. She was wearing a blue Walmart vest. She was last associated being in a white Chevrolet van that's been accounted for in some of her distinguishing characteristics. Native American female, brown hair, brown eyes. Graham has pierced ears, wears eyeglasses. She had braces on her teeth at the time of her disappearance. She's a member of the Lumbee tribe, Lumbee tribe. And on the visual for the podcast, Spotify or YouTube channel, there are pictures. There are 7 pictures of her, and one including the white van that's been accounted for. And on these pictures, it says Graham, this was circa 2015, age progression to 22 years of age, which was circa 2018. And the white van was her father's van. Here's the details of her disappearance. Graham was last seen in Fairmont, North Carolina on February 4, 2015. She left her home in the 4000 block of Centerville Church Road. She was to report to work at a Walmart store in Pembroke, North Carolina. She was a cashier and a door greeter. She was supposed to clock in at 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, but never arrived and has never been heard from again. She'd been driving a white Chevy van registered to her father. That same day, the van was found locked and abandoned. It was parked in a wheat field off East McDonald Road between Chicken Road and Centerville Church Road, several feet off the road with no indications that a struggle had taken place. A photo of the van is posted with this case summary, although the police didn't learn about its location until 12:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Witnesses reported seeing it parked there as early as 6:45 a.m. Eastern Time. Graham lived with her father and stepmother, both of whom worked for the Robeson County Sheriff's Office. On March 16th, 6 weeks after Graham disappeared, her stepmother was fired from her position in the sheriff's office. She'd worked there for 23 years. Authorities haven't stated the reason for her termination or whether it was related to Graham's disappearance. And finally, little information is available in Graham's disappearance, but it's uncharacteristic of her to leave without warning. She had moved to North Carolina from Texas just a few months before she disappeared. She is described as a responsible person, a dependable employee who was making friends and was happy with her new life in North Carolina. Her case remains unsolved. If you have any information, good, bad, or ugly, about the whereabouts of Sarah Nicole Graham, please contact the Robeson County Sheriff's Office at 910-671-3170. Again, if you have any information about the whereabouts of Sarah Nicole Graham, contact the Robeson County Sheriff's Office here in North Carolina, 910-671-3170. You can also find information about her on the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NAMUS, which is NAMUS, the Fayetteville Observer, WBTW News 13, the FBI, so you can go to FBI.gov, WNCN, Web Sleuths, and finally, the Missing Indigenous People of Canada and the U.S. This link will be posted in the show notes, as well as Dr. MAIYSHA's Linktree and her IG page. Thank you so much for joining us on the Trigger Warning Talk podcast. In closing, live in awareness, never live in fear. Keep your head on a swivel. Situational awareness is so important, especially in these times, because I and my work partners want to teach people how to survive in these real times. Take a first aid class, a CPR class, learn how to use an AED, learn how to stop the bleed. If you need any help with those things, you can always reach out to me, because I teach all of those things and then some. Also, make sure that you talk with your local politicians, your local first responders. Find out what services and resources are available in your community. It's not a matter of if, but when and where an active emergency is going to happen. I want you to be an immediate responder, because until EMS and police and fire shows up, you may be the only one there helping render aid. Be a by-doer, not a bystander, as my work partner Dexter Pickens always said. Until the next episode, LP out.